Chapter 16, Danger in the Rapids. The man standing in the ancient ruins was about 30 years old, tall, blond, and attractive-looking. Recovering from his surprise at seeing the Danas and Mr. Strong, he smiled. "Hello there," he called up from the pit. "You folks gave me a scare. Where did you all come from? I'm not used to having visitors in this remote spot." "We're from a ranch north of here," Mr. Strong said non-committally. The friendly stranger said he was Hal Compton, an archaeologist from Atlanta, Georgia. "I'm writing a thesis for my PhD on findings in dinosaur country." "How fascinating!" Jean exclaimed. "And are you staying here?" "Yes, I'm camping out. Do you all want to come down and see what I've found?" Mr. Compton asked cordially. He pointed to a crude ladder which reached into the pit. The others had not noticed it before because the ladder hugged the side and blended with the earth so well that it was unobtrusive. "I'll go first," Mr. Strong offered, and after he had made the descent, the Danas quickly climbed down. A closer look at Hal Compton's open, friendly face helped assure them he was a person to be trusted. The rancher now introduced the sisters and himself to the archaeologist. "By any chance, do you girls attend Starhurst boarding school?" he asked eagerly. "Why, yes," Louise answered in amazement. "Do you know anyone at Starhurst?" "I sure do," Hal said. "My kid sister Amy goes there. She has often spoken of you girls." As he grinned, Jean could see a family resemblance. She cried out, "Of course! Amy Compton! She's a grand girl!" "And a straight-A student," Louise added. Mr. Strong laughed. "Talk about a small world! We've just proved it." He now reminded the Danas they should look around quickly, then depart, because they still had many miles to cover. "Follow me," Hal invited, and led the way among the interesting centuries-old ruins. Many of the buildings still had roofs. Some dwellings were small, while others were large and contained series of rooms, one opening into another. "This is a huge settlement," Louise commented. "Thousands of people must have lived here." "That's part of what I'm trying to find out," said Hal. "I've filled several notebooks, and I have a couple of theories about this place. The thing I must do now is establish if any of them are right. Take this spot we're coming to, for instance," he said, gesturing toward what looked to the Danas like a plaza. "Yes?" Jean prompted with great interest. "Well," said Hal Compton, "students don't hear so much about sacrifices among the Indians up north as they do about those of the southern Indians, especially the ones in Mexico. But I've about concluded that this section we're standing in was the center of the city where all religious ceremonies, including sacrifices, were held. I'm trying now to determine whether animals or humans were offered to the Indian gods." When Hal and his visitors reached the plaza, the archaeologist pointed out an enormous stone slab in the middle. Steps were carved into one side. "This is where I think the priests, or whatever the tribe called its religious leaders, ascended with the unfortunate victim." "Ugh," said Jean. "It makes me shudder even to think about it." Hal Compton laughed. "If this makes you squeamish, maybe I shouldn't show you my big discovery." "What is it, a skeleton?" Louise asked. "Oh no, nothing so mild as that," the archaeologist teased. "It's the knife I figure was used in the sacrifices." "Horrible thought," Jean remarked, hunching her shoulders. "Well," said Hal, "in some cultures the victims considered it an honor to be chosen as sacrificial offerings." "Some honor, a knife in the heart," Jean remarked, unconvinced. The two girls and Mr. Strong followed Hal Compton to a small anteroom, which he told them was part of an Indian chief's palatial home. The roof, a huge stone slab, was still intact. Inside, Hal had placed on the floor various artifacts he had found. The young archaeologist picked up an ancient knife about 10 inches long. Its blade was made of black stone. "Isn't this magnificent?" he asked proudly. "I suppose so," said Jean, grimacing. "But it's gruesome looking just the same." "I'll go along with that." Hal Compton laughed good-naturedly. "I'd say this knife is well over 1,000 years old, but it still would be very effective if used today." "I believe it," Mr. Strong remarked wryly. Presently the group emerged into the sunshine. As they started back toward the ladder, Hal asked, "How did you all happen to be riding through here?" "We're looking for our German shepherd dog that ran away from our train," Jean replied, and told Hal about their recent trip to the Orient, their stopover in San Francisco, and their start for home with Baron. "Have you, by any chance, seen Baron?" "No, I haven't," Hal replied. "Sorry." Louise asked, "Have you noticed 2 men riding together near here, or a man and a woman?" "The answer is still no," the young man answered. "But I guess there's someone near here, all right. While I was looking around the area, I stopped in a cave several miles back, thinking I might sleep there. But it was so far from this site that I moved out again." Jean asked quickly, "Where was this cave?" When Hal Compton told her, Jean and her companions were sure it was the same cave at which they had stopped. Hal went on to say, "The place contains some interesting pictographs, which I want to go back and study. But it was littered with food, cans, and store wrappers, too. The folks who left the mess couldn't have been there very long before my visit. I could tell from the date of a San Francisco newspaper they left behind." "San Francisco?" Louise repeated thoughtfully. "Did you find anything there to identify whoever was using the cave?" "Well, in a way, yes," Hal answered. "I suppose if I were a detective, instead of an archaeologist, I could tell you exactly who the person was. Amy tells me you girls are good sleuths. Probably you can figure this out. I saw part of a burned letter and read it." "What did it say?" Louise urged. Hal Compton paused a moment to think. "Boy, you're really putting me through the 3rd degree," he teased. "As well as I can recall, the only words left were something like this: 'Dear Ben, you're letting yourself in for trouble on this art deal. Watch that gang.'" As the Danas exchanged startled glances, Hal Compton said in surprise, "Don't tell me you know what the letter's about." The young sleuths instinctively refrained from telling him their suspicions that the recipient of the letter might have been Ben Hopley. Jean countered flippantly, "I should hope not. Sounds as if something crooked is going on." The sisters were thinking, nevertheless, there was a good chance that not only the letter, but also the newspaper belonged to Ben Hopley. He probably had returned to the cave and discovered that both the newspaper and the letter had been moved from the spot where he had left them. Hopley, no doubt, immediately concluded someone had been there and decided to leave at once. He had either completely destroyed the papers before the ranch group's arrival or had taken them with him. Mr. Strong and Hal Compton now moved ahead. Louise and Jean lingered behind to discuss this possible new clue. "Do you think Ben Hopley is still around?" Jean asked her sister. "Yes, I do. He may have been the one who shot the arrow at us." "If he is that desperate, he and his horse thief pal Simpson must be out for big stakes," Jean stated emphatically. The sisters again were stymied as to what these stakes might be. Finally, Louise said, "Maybe this art deal mentioned in the letter figures in the mystery. I wonder how." Jean reminded her that Blanche Carmino had gone to art school. If she is the witch, do you suppose that somehow she fits into the gang's scheme? She could, but why is certainly a puzzle. Also, who in the gang was Ben's correspondent warning him about? I have a hunch the witch will be able to answer a lot of our questions. The girls caught up to the two men just as they reached the foot of the ladder. Hal Compton had pulled out a wallet and was scribbling his home address on a bit of paper. Finally, Mr. Strong shook hands and wished the archaeologist good luck with his research. "By the way, how did you get here?" Louise asked the Southerner. "On a horse I rented, but he disappeared. Stolen, probably." After their own recent experiences, the girls were sure this was the case. Louise wondered if the Reinhardts had taken Hal's horse too, since they could have used one. "I've sure had bad luck with my transportation," the archaeologist went on. "A few days back I was working on a river a few miles from here. I was using a dugout somebody left, but one night it drifted away. Since then I've had to depend on my own 2 feet. They're a little more reliable. When I get through with my project here, I'll just hike back to civilization." Mr. Strong laid a hand on Hal's shoulder. "You don't have to do that. You told me a few minutes ago you'd be winding up your work at this site in about a week. I'll come back with a horse and pick you up." "That's right kind of you, sir." Hal smiled broadly. "Thanks. I'll be seeing you then." Louise and Jean said goodbye and told Hal they would like to read his thesis when it was complete. He laughed. "You all may be old and gray by that time," he said. The Danas and Mr. Strong went up the ladder from the pit, descended the other ladder, crossed the bench, and hurried down to their waiting horses. The riders climbed into the saddles and flicked the reins. For some time they rode along easily. Then suddenly their path was blocked by a rushing stream. It was boiling with rapids and filled with whirlpools and boulders. The sisters were aghast. "Do we have to cross this?" Jean asked, eyeing the water apprehensively. "I'm afraid we do if we expect to make it to Lost Lake," Mr. Strong replied. "There's no other way." Louise was thoughtful. Finally, she conjectured, "If someone has been trying to keep us away from Lost Lake, he probably knows about these rapids and figures we'd never follow this route. That's why we haven't been bothered since leaving the larger canyon." "He figured wrong," Jean said. "But how are we ever going to get through this water to the other side?" "It poses a real problem, all right," Mr. Strong said with a frown. "Suppose I walk along the bank and see if I can find a better place for us to cross." The girls waited patiently, surveying the scene before them. The narrow gorge had suddenly ended at the stream, with level ground and a forest directly on the other side of the water. Suddenly they heard Mr. Strong give a shout of triumph. "I found an abandoned dugout with a paddle in it," he said. "It must be the one Hal Compton told us had floated away." He dragged it along the shore to where the girls were standing, then said, "I'll take the long lariat off my saddle horn, tie one end around this hooked rock and the other to the dugout. Then I'll try to negotiate the stream in the canoe. If I have any trouble, you girls pull on the rope and bring me back." Louise and Jean jumped from their saddles and helped to secure the dugout, while the rancher tied the other end of the rope around the rock. "Well, here goes," he said, stepping into the crudely made craft. "I feel like one of those old pioneers who came west." "Or an Indian," said Jean, giggling. The sisters held the rope so that the dugout would not progress too fast. They could see that the going was very difficult as they watched the rancher switch his crude paddle from one side of his canoe to the other, trying to avoid the jagged rocks. The rushing water hit the craft full force, threatening to capsize it. "Mr. Strong is amazing," Louise said admiringly. He was about 2/3 of the way across the raging stream when suddenly both girls cried out in alarm. Apparently the dugout had been caught in a swirling current. The canoe overturned. Mr. Strong was thrown into the water among the rocks. End of chapter 16.